So today we're going to be starting a study of fabric, and fabric is fairly difficult to draw because it's got so many different plane changes, and some of the things that we learned about the sphere with things like reflected light and shadow core are going to apply to drawing fabric as well. So I want you to kind of keep those concepts in the back of your mind as we start to walk through our diagram of our fabric. This project is going to be a 2-day study. So the first half of the assignment is to simply do all your measurements in vine charcoal and get proportions right and decide how you're going to crop it. So you'll be putting a piece of fabric on your wall. This piece of fabric that I had pinned up was a big piece of like polyester. It didn't wrinkle badly. If you have really wrinkly cotton sheets, that's going to be a nightmare to try to draw. So you want kind of big, simple folds. If you have a light colored bath towel, or if you have a pillowcase that you could iron and then just drape kind of a simple shape. It doesn't need to be as large of a piece of fabric as I'm showing you in this slide. But you do want to make it loose so that you've got some interesting curves in it, and then intentionally move the fabric around so that you get some really interesting cascading folds at the corner. So it's going to take a little bit of manipulation. It would be a good idea to have your light source on as you're positioning the fabric so that you can get some really strong shapes of light and shadow. So try to have just a single light source, put the light from one side, don't have it behind you because then it's going to wash everything out. It's like having a flash on a camera where it just bleaches out all of the sense of volume. So a single light source from the side, and the stronger the shadows, the easier this is going to be for you to diagram out as patterns of light and shadow. So this was I think it was light blue in real life. I just turned it into black and white so that we could see the values a little bit more clearly. And the fabric was a little bit lighter than the bulletin board that I pinned it to. So when I'm thinking about local value, I'm going to make the back bulletin board area a little bit darker value than the light that's hitting the fabric. So you are thinking about keeping the values of the high key objects. So let's say you have like a white towel. Even the darkest shadows on a white towel should not be as dark as the shadows on, let's say, a blue wall or would be. So think about what color the object is painted or dyed in the first place, and then try to make the light and shadow all fit within a range on that value scale. So you shouldn't have pure white and pure black on the same object. You're going to pick maybe 4 or 5 values out of a 10-step value scale to kind of limit the range of tones on each one of those different areas. So this is probably too complex, this big piece. I could spend a long time trying to draw this accurately. So what I would prefer that you do is once you pin up your fabric, if you've got a large piece like a bed sheet or a tablecloth, you might also want to just zoom in. So you're going to get your little viewfinder out or use your hands to try to crop a section of it. And what I would suggest is zooming in so that you've got at least one spot where you've pinned it. If you don't want to put holes in your wall, like let's say you're renting and you don't want to have to pay your landlord for holes in your wall, you could also drape a towel on the back of a chair. But again, make sure that there's some wrinkles in it. Don't just lay it smooth across the chair, or it's going to be really difficult to draw and see that light and shadow. So we want some wrinkles, and big simple folds are better than a lot of crinkles. You also don't want to have a patterned piece of fabric, so I would stay away from really busy floral prints and things like that. It's hard to see the light and shadow underneath a lot of pattern. So the other thing I'd like you to do is bring some of the folds at the corners of your object out and position them so that we get some of those S-curves. And I'll show you another one here that we'll actually be drawing from. So you're going to zoom in, you're going to try to pick an interesting section of the image. If you can include at least one spot where the object is draping, and I'm going to call that the hub, so it's the point to which a lot of the angles are going to be directed. Here's the one that we'll actually draw from. So I've zoomed in on a little bit more complex area of it where there's some plane changes within this larger fold that's kind of a triangular shape. And then we also have some of the rippling edges of the fabric that are going to give us some practice drawing these continuous kind of S-curves and thinking about the folds that way. So I'll move this off to the side and shrink it down a little bit so that we can fit it onto our screen here along with the demo camera. And we'll start drawing. Okay, so I've pre-toned a piece of the heavyweight drawing paper out of our drawing pad. This is about 14 by 17. And we're going to be doing this whole drawing using the vine charcoal. So it's, again, super important that you do not accidentally grab your compressed charcoal, which is the heavier stuff, because if you draw lines with the compressed charcoal, you're going to have a really hard time getting rid of those outlines in the end. So with the vine charcoal, I usually just break a smaller piece of it, and then what we'll be doing is, just to start with, maybe do a light kind of gestural estimate of the shape. So do kind of a simplified, if you can look for large shapes of angles, triangles, that's sometimes a good strategy. You can use your skewer to do some measuring as you go, noticing how things fall. So when I'm planning out these angles, I'm looking at how many of the lines end up pointing toward this tack. Even edges that are buried underneath other layers of fabric are going to be angled toward the points where it's pinned to the wall. And I'm looking at a little bit of an angle here. This gets fairly complex, but for now I'm just going to try to get the basic, kind of simplify into wedge shapes, and then I can kind of fix things later as we go. But each time I draw one of these edges of the fabric, I'm thinking about where that tack is. It's almost like one-point perspective in a way. And you can be measuring, so even this one, I feel like I need a little bit more of an angle here, so I'm going to shift these things a little bit further over maybe. And the nice thing about the vine charcoal is it's really easy to make corrections as you go. So there's not a lot of effort really in making those changes. That'll allow me to bring this line over a little bit further. Under there. Okay. So we're kind of wanting to emphasize the sense of gravity, things being pulled down. And in this area it gets quite complicated, so if you can simplify things, like I kind of see this angled heart shape here. I see a triangular shape here. There's another, maybe need to move over a little bit. So these first steps, we're just diagramming out the big shapes. We're not worried about adding any shadows or light yet. There's a great big fold that tucks slightly under this one that's heading towards another tack. And then you could also diagram out shapes of shadow if you want to. Like I notice this is more of a U shape. And actually this goes over, but then this other shape kind of tucks in behind it. So that'll be a slightly different value. And then this might be the angle of the cast shadow. So I'm noticing that it seems like this might need, I'm just comparing where the base of this center fold is compared to the one on the side there. They're almost at the same point. So you'll work back and forth until you start to get these shapes in the right place. And then when you're pretty happy with where those shapes are, we can start to refine some of these contours. So I'm noticing that I'm bringing this angle way too far over. It really needs to end almost, just a tiny bit below that one. So I'm going to try to fix that. And this seems to be, there's a little bit of a crease in the fabric there. So usually when I'm trying to construct these curves on the fabric, what I do is I think about it transparently first, and I try to find a continuous S-curve or a C shape that runs through the whole fabric. So in this case, this one probably, if we're thinking about a dotted line, it becomes this backward, or this farthest back piece, loops around to this one. And then this one, it seems like it's just maybe disappearing behind this fold, but then I'm guessing that this one might actually, if we could see through this, might actually become this curve. So if you can think of it as a continuous curve, you'll do a better job noticing how the forms wrap into the contour and not just end abruptly on a real sharp angle. And then this one is a more gentle curve, but it also curves back. Now, one of the most common problems that students have is when they're drawing these curves, when they're starting to draw the lines in that connect, they'll do one of two things. So they'll have their curve, and then they'll either do this, where they like hook the curve outward and bulge it out, or they do something like, they do this. So let's say the fabric comes around like this. And I think what happens is they're seeing this curve and they're thinking that the verticals are curved too, but really in almost all the cases, these lines should just be a straight line that head toward the tack. So instead of bulging it out like this, you find the fattest part of the curve. So if you were imagining this as being part of an ellipse, you find that midpoint, and right from that point at the outermost, and then let's imagine this is part of another ellipse, just from that widest part of the curve, you're just going to head straight to the tack usually. It almost never will curve. So get your S curve figured out, and then wherever it reverses direction at the farthest point out on the curve, head straight for the tack. So we'll work that out in our drawing as well. So from the farthest part of this curve, let's say right there, we're going to go straight to the tack. Try not to, this one, there's a curve there, try to make that a fairly straight line. This is the furthest most curve of that hidden fold, and so straight. Again, I sometimes will even draw through temporarily to make sure I'm really aiming all of my lines for that tack and not just taking it straight up and down. It should really taper toward that point. And then this one, the fattest part of this curve is maybe right here. So from that point again, aim for the tack. And then I'm looking at this shape. This line hits pretty close to where the lines change direction. I still might be a little bit too up and down. I probably should have these contours a little further over, but I'm going to just leave it at that, I think. Now here, there's a little bit of an angle. I don't have that in there yet, so if you think about, I'm kind of judging the width of that dark shadow space compared to the size of these two folds, and then trying to figure out where that angle happens. And then it kind of reverses back. So I think I need to shift this little heart shape up a little bit. So you'll just keep rubbing out lines and changing them until you get things to look pretty good. You can also, if it helps you to diagram it out, you can think about where the shadow shapes are. So even though we're not going to add a lot of shading right now, you could do some real simple stuff just to kind of help you keep track of which shapes will be in shadow and which shapes will be in light. See how this sort of reverses? We've got light on the left side of the fabric here, but when we get down into this shape, because it's kind of dented in, the light's actually hitting on this side now. So it's alternating light, light. This gets not quite as dark as the other side, but it'll have some tone in there. And then along this edge, this will also be a pretty shaded area. So, okay, this shape will be mostly light until we get to I think I've got that too high. I've got to come down further. The nice thing about the fabric is it's kind of forgiving as far as proportions go. I'm a little bit off, but I think as long as my fabric feels convincing in the light and shadow, it's going to be okay. So this is shadow shape, and then this also shadow. This is kind of half tone. It's not as dark as the other area. And then there's a little bit of shadow here. This is a big shadow. I think I brought this too far over. The shape of shadow there. I want to make sure that this whole shape, there's a little bit of light hitting this fold, but most of this is going to be in shadow too. Okay. And then this big fold, there's shadow here. This big fold is mostly in light. And then there's a little bit of shadow that's starting here. I cropped this. You see how this seems to be getting smaller? It looks like that's the edge of the image, but I think it's because the second fold of fabric is so white that it's, when it copied, or when I adjusted the contrast to make the lights a little bit more visible, but it turned this one fold into a pure white. So I think I'll probably add a little bit of tone to that just so that we can see that it's not just the edge of the composition. And then this is going to have some tone in it too. So that would be about as far as you would need to get for, well, you could, if you wanted to block in which parts of each fold are in shadow and which parts are in light. Again, don't spend a lot of time fine-tuning the values until you get it cleared with me that your proportions are close enough to start shading. The main thing I'm going to be looking for is that these curves are convincing and that there's a sense of, we kind of feel the weight of the cloth drooping down in perspective. So you'd want to stop at that point after you've drawn for about an hour or so. I was working a little too fast, but once we get to this point, you could take a photograph of your fabric and take a photograph of your rough draft of your composition and send it to me in Moodle, and then we'll come back. I'll probably do a little bit of correcting here so I get this angle right, but I can do that off camera. And then I'll come back and I'll show you how to actually start blocking in the lights and the shadows and looking for the more intricate stuff like the shadow core and the reflected light and so on. But this is about the state that your rough draft should be in before you submit it.